And could I call on Councillor James Daniels for the karakia timatanga?
Kia ora koutou, he riki mahana ki a koutou ki a tātou. Kei te mihi mo te hui o te rā, he karakia. Tūtaua mai runga, tūtaua mai raro, tūtaua mai roto, tūtaua mai waho. Kia tau mai te Māori tū, te Māori ora, ki te katoa. Haumi e hui e, tai e.
Kia ora and thank you. I have apologies from Councillor Tim Scandrick for lateness and for temporary absence. He has a couple of meetings on this morning that may mean that he's unable to attend for the whole meeting. And I note that Councillor James Goff is attending by Zoom. Are there any other apologies? I note that people are struggling to get their coffees and teas in time, but they'll be here shortly. So would someone move the apologies be accepted? Sam McDonald, seconded Andrew Turner. Put that motion. All those in favour say aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. In terms of declarations of interest, I've got Councillor Goff and Councillor Templeton for public excluded item 8. Public participation, there's no public forum today, no presentation of petitions today. And so now we move on to item 6. We're going to begin with item 6 on the main agenda, the central government reform of water services. And could I call on Helen Beaumont to present the report to us? Thank you.
Good morning, and I will have a couple of colleagues join me through this presentation. So the reform of the three water sector has been underway from central government for a number of years and gained considerable momentum following the Havelock North incident. So following Havelock North there was an inquiry, and that inquiry identified systemic failures across the regulatory system, across enforcement and across delivery of Three Waters. So nobody really escaped the inquiry's recommendations, and there have been some considerable changes since. The other aspect of the challenges that the Department of Internal Affairs has identified is the infrastructure problem facing councils across the country. And they have scoped what the costs of those are and estimated some $4.5 billion for water treatment and wastewater treatment plants, and between 10 and 30 billion for reticulation. So not only are those numbers large, but the ranges are very large, and that goes to considerable uncertainty around the state of our infrastructure and our Three Waters assets in particular. That's perhaps unsurprising in that Three Waters assets are generally underground and they're not the easiest assets to manage. The other aspect of it is the capability and capacity, and this is particularly across smaller councils. So in the larger metropolitans, the water and wastewater services are generally run by teams. In small councils, they're often run by 1 or 2 engineers, and those engineers may also have responsibility for roading, bridges and other infrastructure. So there is a real challenge for those smaller councils in terms of the depth of expertise that they have available to them. Another consequence of small councils is that they have no economies of scale in terms of their infrastructure and the operations that sit behind that. So the costs for connections can be up to 60 times different for a small rural settlement compared to a major metropolitan. The additional one is around the regulatory arrangements for both wastewater and stormwater discharges and for compliance with drinking water standards. And again, we're not covering ourselves with glory nationally. There are a large number of wastewater plants in particular operating on expired resource consents and a number of supplies which do not comply with the drinking water standards. In terms of the reform objectives, these have been well canvassed by central government around the country, and most councils and councillors have attended the workshops. And the reform objectives have been clearly laid out and agreed by Cabinet. So the first one is around improving the safety and quality of our drinking water and also the environmental performance of our wastewater and stormwater systems. So it's looking at that public health aspect and environmental wellbeing. The second one is improving the resilience of our Three Waters services. So that's against both short-term risks and events such as earthquakes, which we've experienced here, as well as longer-term changes like climate change and the hazards that come with that. The third one is moving Three Waters service delivery to a financially sustainable footing and ensuring accessibility to those services on an equitable basis. So that's getting at that difference between the small communities and the metropolitans. The next one is around ensuring that local government continues to deliver on its wider wellbeing mandate. So that is an associated work program, so that sits alongside the reform program. Ensuring that all New Zealanders have equitable access to affordable Three Waters services is not only looking at that difference between the metropolitans and the small centres, but potentially extending services to those communities that don't have them today. And there are a number of communities that either have no services, no centrally reticulated services, or have services that are run by volunteers. So they have community schemes, and again, they don't have access to the capability and capacity that they need to ensure that those services are well run. Improving the coordination of resources is looking at that infrastructure problem and tackling it at a much larger scale, and possibly at a national scale. So while they're talking about regional delivery, there would be some alignment of the way that services are delivered such that procurement across the whole country could unlock some efficiencies. The final one is around transparency and accountability, and there's quite a lot of discussion about setting up a regulatory agency that also looks at the transparency of costs and charging arrangements. So I'll hand across to David Adamson to talk about the key features of the reform.
Basically, the water reform services delivery entities that they're talking about, and recognise the MOU as saying we need to consider these. It does not mean that we only need to consider them. So we do have a wide range of options, but they are looking, as we've explained, significant scale, talking about multi-regional potentially. So not only just covering Canterbury, but potentially covering a model that they are quite keen on is 5 for the country, which is almost like the Super 15 rugby franchise. They are saying asset owning, and so they want to transfer assets over, or one of the models is, and the reason for that is so that they can leverage borrowing off their balance sheet potentially. And then they're looking at statutory identities with competence-based boards as opposed to elected-based boards. So they are looking at appointments. So what they are talking about potentially, and this will come out as part of tranche 2 or part of the conversation that they're asking us to engage in as part of this MOU, will be around what those potential delivery entities look like. They are very, very keen, and we'll show you on the next slide, ensuring that iwi and Māori interests are representative, and they are committed, or they are saying that they're committed to a conversation at a national level, and we believe that's something we should really support, that conversation happening at the right levels with the right people. They're committed to a community voice. They believe that water services are an integrated part of everyone's life. It's probably the first thing you interface with when you get up in the morning, and it's the last thing you might interface with when you go to bed at night. So they play an important part in everyone's life, and so they're committed to making sure the community has a voice in there. They are saying drinking water and wastewater services are a priority. Drinking water obviously is part of the Havelock North expansion, and you will be aware they've set up they've put the regulatory drinking water bill through as first reading, and wastewater is the next one around environment. They are also saying that a fundamental cornerstone is that the assets will remain in public ownership. Now, what that model looks like will be interesting, and part of that discussion between now and tranche 2 would be what would that look. One of the models they have put out is a collective council shareholding, but that gets very, very complicated when you have a look at the size of the various assets that would transfer from various councils and how that would work around some governance ownership of that company and decisions. Key principles of the funding stimulation, and I think we've got to recognise, first of all, the 761 first tranche money is related to COVID. It wants to stimulate the economy. And so it's really important that the projects that we potentially, if we sign the MOU, that we potentially look at are ones that can be delivered quickly and fast. We are in a lucky or unlucky position, depends. We did defer a bit out of our annual plan, so we have got projects that we could get to the market absolutely immediately, and so we are putting up a list that we think we could deliver, recognising that they have to be started by the 1 March 2021, and they've got to be finished by the 30th of June 2022. So basically we are intending to start a whole pile of them before the beginning of March. We will get them to the market as soon as we possibly can if we sign up to the MOU. It also supports the objectives of Three Waters service reform, encouraging us to participate, and that's probably the little fishhook that's in the back of the MOU, but it's a fishhook that talks about open consultation, communication and exploring options. It's a non-binding agreement, but it is a binding agreement that we will share information and work constructively to look at the pros and the cons of those options. I believe that's pretty much how we would deal with central government on all matters. We are open, we want to be constructive, we obviously need to be at the table to put the Christchurch perspective on behalf of our ratepayers. Release of funding, so talking about 50% up front, and then we have to apply for the rest of them in tranches as we spend, and then basically we have to then monitor and report. We've got a delivery plan. Once we put that delivery plan in and funding plan and sign the MOU, they're giving us an undertaking that they will approve that delivery plan within 30 days, which would enable us to start immediately. Obviously, we have to monitor and report on that, and we've got to work our way through those delivery and reporting functions. Finally, funding shortfalls. If there's anything at the end of the projects, basically, or if one of them blows out quite significantly, that is a responsibility of ours, recognising that a number of these would have been in our long-term plan anyway, and so you would have had 100% responsibility for funding. Here there's an opportunity, we believe we could deliver them within budget at 100% central government funding. Reform timetable, and I'll just highlight a couple of things there. If you look on the top line, the first thing is engage with iwi Māori to establish interest in the reform program. We are disappointed that that hasn't happened earlier, but you will see that is one of the priorities the Crown has said that they will do as soon as possible. The second one that I would introduce, if you have a look at the end of the first grey box, tranche 1, they're talking about legislation introduced. That legislation relates to maybe the new entity. So it gives you a very tight timetable between now and then for that tranche 2 conversation to happen, and to us to talk to not only the Crown about it, but our community, local iwi and other interested parties. So a very, very ambitious timetable between tranche 1 and tranche 2. However, and you've got a general elections in the middle of it somewhere, and yes. Do note, however, that they are talking to the new entities, and that's in tranche 3, commence operations prior to local government elections, the next local government elections. Again, an incredibly ambitious timetable in there. This is what I briefly discussed with you, the potential multi-regions. If you have a look, the 10 regions is really the based on regional council boundaries. but what they seem to have is a bit of a flavour for the picture on the left there, which is the 5 ones which we fold into something that they call the top of the south, which is ourselves, West Coast, Marlborough, Nelson, Tasman. But again, I believe they are exploring and willing to look at a variety of different models to look at what is the best outcome when you measure them against their original reforms. I'll move back to Helen and she can go through the MOU funding agreement and delivery plan.
So in terms of implementing the whole program, if Council agrees to sign up to the Memorandum of Understanding, there are 2 associated documents. The first one is the funding agreement, which sets out what the central government will give to us, what those funding objectives are and what we can spend the money on. And the second one being the delivery plan, and that outlines the specific projects that we will put up, where those projects are located, and then there's some bespoke reporting that we will need to undertake to the to central government to ensure that the money is being spent as it should. So as we've covered, if Council signs the MOU, that Memorandum of Understanding is non-binding and doesn't give rise to any obligations beyond engaging with central government on the reform program and engaging with our neighbours as they also look at the opportunities of the reform. The funding agreement and delivery plan will be required before the money is handed across, and for this council the initial funding allocation would be just over 20 million, and there would be a further 20 million due to come to this council if sufficient other councils across the Canterbury region sign up. The indications to date are that those other councils will be signing up, and the indications to date are also that the other councils agree that the money should be divided, so that's the regional money, should be divided on the same basis as the initial allocations. So that would see this council getting a further just over 20 million. There is an opportunity, of course, to increase our engagement and collaboration with all of the stakeholders involved, and many people are very interested in what happens with the water reform program before tranche 2 in June 2021. This paper that's in front of you today is the 25th of August, and we need a decision by the 31st of August. After that date, the tranche 1 funding disappears. In terms of what is required within Three Waters, we earlier went through what the drivers are for the reform program, and this is just a bit of a reminder that there is increasing regulation coming our way in terms of both drinking water and the environmental performance of our wastewater and stormwater systems. There are deferred renewals here in Christchurch and across the settlements on Banks Peninsula in our Three Waters infrastructure, so that is a challenge for us. We have the challenge of climate change coming at us as well, and also expectations of our customers and consumers. One of the streams of work that has been running alongside of this is an engagement with iwi, so for us with Ngāi Tahu and with Papatipu Runanga. So the Christchurch City Council has engaged with iwi, with Ngāi Tahu, through the Canterbury Mayoral Forum, and the indication to the Canterbury Mayoral Forum was that there was no objection to signing up to the tranche 1. However, there's not support beyond that without a lot more talk and a lot more discussion and consideration of what the issues are. And similarly, we have engaged through the Tahongana Committee with the local Runanga to seek support to enter this tranche 1. In terms of what we wish to do following today, that is to continue to engage with iwi and Papatipu Runanga, and that would be prior to any further commitment to tranche 2. We also wish to prioritise and to continue to share expertise in terms of Three Waters infrastructure, and there's a particular emphasis there on isolated and small communities, both present and future. So that is a bit of a nod to our district plan that sets out areas for papakainga housing. We also wish to undertake work with key partners, including both iwi and Papatipu Runanga, to ensure that suitable engagement occurs right across the community. and that would be supported by central government, which needs to push that at a national level. In terms of the funding itself, there is a list, both a long list and a short list for projects to be funded through this 20 plus 20 million. We initially prioritised the candidates for funding by putting water supply ahead of wastewater, ahead of projects that addressed all three waters. We also looked at deliverability because, of course, we have to essentially be shovel ready and get these projects delivered within the timeframe set out by central government. And we considered where those projects were sitting. So at the top of the list, we considered renewals that had been deferred through the last annual plan. We looked at deferred maintenance, and then we looked at our renewals backlog. So that is looking into the long-term plan for the next lot of projects that we wish to undertake. And finally, we ranked them by looking at whether or not they contributed to council's strategic priorities, water supply and health and safety issues, and then what that sort of ranking of contribution was. So following that ranking and further discussions, both formal and informal really, we have come up with this proposed list for funding. One of the things to note is you'll see water supply is at the top of the list, the water supply renewals, and there are 4 lots of water supply renewals, mains renewals in there, which will be a considerable benefit to our overall water supply system, and that will assist us in terms of the work that's required to meet the improvement actions in our water safety plan. Associated with that, we've also got some maintenance work at our water supply pump stations, and you'll note there's a specific project in there around the Smart Water Network. Now, the Smart Water Network was first introduced to Council formally with the Beyond Wellheads paper, where we wished to use new technology and take advantage of the Internet of Things to do real-time monitoring of our network, and that will contribute both to more efficient and effective operation, but also to being able to demonstrate the safety of that supply. So demonstrate in real time the quality of the water and quickly respond to any changes that we detect in the system. So that gives another lift to that smart water monitoring work. And the other thing to note is that we've got in there a needs assessment of small private community water and wastewater schemes, and we've increased the funding to that, so there's 300,000 in there to look at the small communities, both present and perhaps where some growth is envisaged, and that work will contribute to looking at the options for supplying those small settlements and inform the future work program, whether that's through the long-term plan or through tranche 2 or through any new entity that will inform the overall future work program for Three Waters infrastructure. And that's
just coming back onto that program, part of the discussion that we had with the iwi was looking at support. If you have a look on there, there's a lot of interest around the small communities. As Helen said, that needs assessment, looking at all of our small communities. You can appreciate most of those will be on Banks Peninsula because most of the city is obviously connected to the big water supply schemes. So we've bumped that up so it doesn't only look at the needs but also potentially might identify some options. And so that, I think, would support discussions that we would have between Tranche 1 and Tranche 2 with a whole range of interested community groups, community boards and obviously iwi. We've also put in significant money for the Akaroa wastewater renewals repairs, which again will help us be able to right-size the wastewater treatment plant that we are consulting at the moment with our community, and obviously that has involved a lot of Ngā Tahu input as well as community input, but it's a challenge for our council because of the cost. It's some big dollars, and obviously we've prioritised that work. You'll have a look, there's also some work around Devotional's wastewater treatment plant, which is deferred maintenance, just makes it more reliable. And we've also looked, because the Devotional's is also in the catchment, we have brought up the repairs and renewals regarding the inflow and infiltration. There's a $2 million project in there to actually look at that. So again, would all help optimise the treatment plant, treatment processes, and in actual fact be, I think, give us another level of protection for the environment related to both environmental and cultural values sitting in the island. I think there is one other in there. There's a business case for the regional water service. We need a bit of money. One of the nice things about this 40 million is it can be spent on CapEx and OpEx. And so we will need to do a bit of work at looking at what are those entities and what are the benefits and disbenefits for Christchurch and Christchurch residents. So we are suggesting we have that amount of money so that we can get the right expertise to have a look at the proposals that come in. And you've got to appreciate that's going to have to be probably quite short and sharp if the government's going to try and keep to their timetable that they've put up, which I think is a pretty ambitious timetable. So that just gives you a little bit of an idea of some of that background of some of those projects. That, and you can't see it under the black square, but I think that totals about 42 million. We are wanting to get more projects up and approved, just in case we get good sharp prices through the tender box. So that we have enough projects to fully spend that 40 million if you decide to sign up today. And obviously our neighbours also sign up today.
Yeah, I'm just sorry. Have you finished?
Oh, we're finished?
Yeah, you're finished.
I was just going to bring Shane up to the table in case there are questions or unless he would like to add something.
I think, Shane, if you could commence just with some commentary on the Papatupu Runanga engagement.
Kia ora, mauri ora.
Kia ora.
So the engagement with the 6 Papatupu Runanga has been relatively positive. We're engaged on two fronts. Face-to-face meeting in the Te Hononga Papatupu Runanga meeting last Monday, and we have received written responses back from the Runanga today. 5 of the 6 have responded formally by email in terms of the water reforms, and at the Papatupu Runanga committee meeting last week, Council presented the water reform presentation and sought support from Runanga to enter Tranche 1. The letters that have come back are not opposed to City Council engaging with the Crown on Tranche 1, and actually it's quite clear in those letters that they believe it is a Crown Council engagement that Papatupu Runanga do not need to be involved in. In terms of not opposed as to supporting, I think if you have seen an example letter that has come in, if you referred to the first paragraph, it's very clear there that Runanga are concerned at the lack of engagement from government around the water reforms and the timelines that you're having to adhere to, and so they're not in a position to offer full support. And there is an expectation that through between Tranche 1 and Tranche 2 decisions, that Papatupu Runanga will be fully engaged and at the table in decision-making processes.
Thank you. Just a question on the actual wording of the resolution. So the reference to the because now that the Table 2 is changed slightly, are we able to actually just copy the actual projects and pop them into the wording of the resolution so that it can so that when somebody looks at the resolution some stage in the future that they actually see the projects that were listed rather than having to look for it in the document? Is that possible to do? Yeah.
You want to just lift that table and put that table
Yeah, lift
in
the
there?
table off the presentation and
Yeah.
put it into a resolution, and it can just note that these are the projects, because there's a little bit of work still to be done on the allocation of funding for each of them, but at least it will just simply note that these were the basis for the decision that we made today. Okay? All right. Are there, sorry, Sam and Aaron, Melanie. Oh, right. Let's go around the table. Yeah, Sam. Yes.
No.
No.
Joe, do I need to do something?
Flick the switch. Yeah, Jan, you won't be able to hear.
Yeah, is that? Oh, that's
Yeah.
good. Thanks. Thanks, Dave. Just the first one. Can you just talk me through in terms of the funding arrangement or funding agreement, the delivery plan work that we need to do? So it's great that government have undertaken 30 days to turn it round. At what point would we have that submitted?
We will submit that as soon as we possibly can. If we agree to this today, we will finalise that document, get it to the Chief Executive so she can sign it off. We are hoping within a week we could get it there. They are saying that they would actually receive a delivery plan prior to us signing the MOU. We won't actually get that done, but we are got people working on some of those. Appreciate we've already scoped out a lot of them. They're already designed, sitting in the drawer. So the information of pulling together is not an administration task, but principally an administration task. So we will absolutely accelerate, because then Helen's team's got the challenge of delivering them.
So if we're taking, say, a week from, say 10 days and then 30 days for them, we're effectively going to have the cash early October, aren't we?
That's what we would like to do. They said.
The first lot of it,
yep.
anyway.
And I think if we can get the first up, if we can get our delivery plan in first, maybe we jump the queue. Admittedly, we've got one of the bigger delivery plans of any authority. I don't know what Auckland's got, but apart from Auckland, we have got the largest allocation of funding. Hawke's Bay's got 50 across the region, so no local authority in Hawke's Bay has got 40 million, so ours would be the largest delivery plan.
Okay, and what's the mechanism, and I don't know whether it's something in the resolution, to feed that back to council? Because when you look at the sort of the stadium funding arrangement and things like that, which have taken quite a long time, is there a way in which we can be notified? I just don't want it to drop off the radar.
Yes, so one of the things that we will be doing is appointing a program manager for water reform, and that program manager will manage the delivery of those projects, or drive the delivery of those projects, and report on them, because there will be some bespoke reporting requirements from central government.
So
and we will also report, as part of our bi-monthly report, to the Three Waters Infrastructure and Environment Committee on the progress against that program.
Okay, so that would come through that committee if the funding agreement wasn't to be sorted in the next sort of 6 weeks?
It'll come through that committee as soon as we have it confirmed.
I guess
yes.
what I'm trying to get at is, what's the mechanism for us to see if there's an issue?
I'll give you a memo, or I'll give you an undertaking.
I
We'll put out a memo when we
Excuse
put
me,
the funding
I think
agreement.
that what Sam's suggesting is that we actually write in here the reporting framework, so that you simply report on progress to the Three Waters Infrastructure and Environment Committee. So I'm just trying to find the appropriate place to put that.
Do you want to just put 9 and says agrees? That reporting will be through the Three Waters Infrastructure and Environmental Committee as part of.
It's a bi-monthly. It's
Yes,
every
it's a
second month,
bi-monthly
isn't it?
report.
Bi-monthly report. The bi-monthly report on Three Waters. Is that what it's called?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that one won't be due for another 2 months because it's water tomorrow. That may, would that time out?
That timing should be perfect.
Yep. The next one will be October. Yep, that's good. Yep.
And just a second question, so in terms of the first 20 million we get, if we sign up to it, the second 20, are there any implications in terms of the general election or anything like that that may flow through if there was a change?
We will be signed up prior to that. We understand that there is a reasonably agreement across both parties, but basically your guess is as good as mine of what impact an election, but they would have to then unpick a binding agreement, a funding agreement that they have signed up. So that would get reasonably.
So that second 20, assuming every other council comes in, is is sort of safe as well.
Correct.
Yes.
It is. Okay. Yep, perfect. Thank you.
And we'll definitely know that by the 30th of August.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Aaron?
Thank you. So I've got a couple of questions here. The first of mine is around the letter we received today, Shane. The second paragraph, it is important to observe that Ngāi Tahu opposed the Taumata Arawai Bill and that it support this kaupapa. Why?
So, thank you for the question. The Taumata Arawai Bill refers to the water regulatory bill that was passed recently in Parliament, and it also refers to the Crown entity established to oversee water. The reason that, and this is my summation of the issue, the reason that iwi don't support that kaupapa is that they were not involved in any discussions. They are not represented on that board, and they are the largest iwi that has the largest land coverage in New Zealand. And until the government recognises that, they will remain opposed.
Okay, so that makes it, as our partner, makes it a little difficult for us to support that. But that aside, is water not a
This is a
taonga?
separate issue.
And in which case, if water's a taonga, shouldn't the conversation have begun with iwi across the country before you do a water reform?
I guess that's a matter beyond my
It's a political
ability
question,
to
and it's not
answer.
fair to ask a staff member that question. No, it's not fair to ask a staff member that question. I think that the resolution that we have in front of us is not in relation to the regulatory authority that has been put in place to replace the Ministry of Health. But we are being asked to agree to write to the government and relevant ministers to convey our extreme disappointment as the request from the Runanga, and I agree with that, extreme disappointment that they failed to consult with iwi, and especially Te Runanga o Ngāi Tahu, which not only has the largest land coverage, it has the largest water coverage of any iwi in the country, and the largest coastal area. I mean, it's unacceptable. But that doesn't. This is a separate issue, and what the Runanga have said to us is that they will not. That's why they don't support the kaupapa, but they are saying that that they will take the position that, given that we're going to write directly to the government and relevant ministries, that the tranche 1 agreement to be signed by the Christchurch City Council is between ourselves and the Crown, and they've accepted that. Is that a fair summary?
That's correct, and I think, Aaron, just to further clarify that, iwi will conduct their own engagement with the Crown and express and put on the table their very issues.
Okay, thank you for that. So two others completely different. Why is the restructure focused around 2 waters when we operate as 3 waters? The writers of the report not see the massive dollar signs on the stormwater?
That will be a debate that will go between tranche 1 and tranche 2, I would imagine. Stormwater is always the most complicated. Drinking water and wastewater are a service that I can directly put home to a private property, because basically I have people connect. Stormwater has a whole range of private and public good, and so it gets very, very complicated about how you fund it. Some of the water reform around the world has been 3 waters, and some of it's been 2 waters. The government's initial comments have been that they favour a 2 waters and maybe look at a further 3 waters as we go through, and that's part of the conversation. So at the moment it's there. A 2 waters reform, I think, would be easier initially rather than a 3 waters reform. But again, I think that's part of the conversation we need to have around between tranche 1 and tranche 2.
Yeah, because I just wondered why their choice for going to the 2 rather than the 3, because going by what happened in Havelock North, I think it was stormwater that caused the problem for the drinking water. So it wasn't a bad
No.
stormwater.
No, it wasn't stormwater. It was a flooding incident
Yeah.
that washed contamination in, but there was nothing to do with reticulated stormwater or not.
No.
So
the
it
flooding
wasn't.
was out of the tap.
No, the flooding was out of a rainstorm and a farm pond, whereas stormwater in this sense talks about reticulated stormwater in settlements and formal systems.
Right.
And it's so the priority is seen around drinking water, and that does include source protection of drinking water, which addresses the Havelock North issue.
Okay, thank you. And finally, the shovel-ready term, which is to obviously partially stimulate the economy. If there's all this work going into the shovel-ready 700 million, does that mean that there's a lot of people that do water infrastructure work not working at the moment?
Yes, that's correct. Around the country, a lot of councils, as this council did, deferred work in their annual plan this year.
Right, so this just restarts a lot of deferred work.
That's correct.
Okay, cool, thank you.
Melanie and then Yanni.
I've got 3 questions. 2 of them are quite related. With the allocation of that second 50%, the 20 million, and it's on a quarterly basis, so that means it will come in small chunks. Is that correct? Have I got that right?
That's what we are assuming. Yes. So as we deliver, and we deliver up to the 20 million, and then deliver more, they will pay out the extra money.
Mm-hmm. And so it just struck me before that with the projects needing to be completed by the 30th of June 2022, however, we need to sign up to tranche 2 by the late 2021. Could that affect the rest of that funding? And I know it'll be signed, but I mean, you know, we'd be getting funding if we decided not to sign up to tranche 2, for instance. Would that affect us getting any of the money from signing up from tranche 1?
There's nothing in the agreement that retrospectively will pull that funding. We have a funding agreement, so it's a non-binding agreement, but it's an agreement that they'll fund those projects to that amount. One of the things we are going to try and do is accelerate and deliver those as quickly as we can, because if they came out with a tranche 2 product, and we decided, you know, we believe it might have some money associated with it, and we may decide to sign up to tranche 2. I don't know what's in tranche 2. So basically we want to show the central government that we can deliver on projects. So we are hoping to meet far quicker than that deadline that they've put in here. But basically we don't believe there's any way, once we sign the funding agreement, MOU, that they can rescind on their side of the agreement.
Can I just ask the Chief Executive to comment on that?
Yeah.
And I do think, Councillor Coker, as well, when we send our delivery plan in, we should be clear, because both parties need to act in good faith. We are being asked to be open and considered in terms of the debate, and we must stress that if we sign the MOU, that we expect the allocation to be provided, irregardless of whatever decision this council takes at tranche 2.
Yeah.
So I think we just need to be clear. It's the memorandum of understanding that's non-binding. Okay, the funding agreement and delivery plan are binding. They're binding documents. They bind both parties. So they will give us the money, and we'll deliver what we said we would deliver for it, and report on it to demonstrate that.
My last question probably isn't really directly related to this, but it is coming from your one of your slides about the reform and what the government's looking for in a new authority, about competency-based boards, which I think is a good idea. But because we haven't talked about it, but I was wondering if there's been examples of those sorts of boards before, and how a community voice would actually be able to have an input there when boards are being put together unelected, I guess, by the community. But so it's not really a question for you, but it's just a question.
And I think that's part of the conversation we need with the Crown. And look, there would be a lot of different things. If you look at the assets that we would track, let's say, for instance, a Canterbury water identity was formed by government, we would have 75% of the value in that organisation. Would we have 75% of the vote? Some of our other local authorities don't quite like that. So there's a lot of water and discussion to go under the bridge, sorry for the pun, about how you set up these entities, and so that's why we are suggesting we set up an establishment committee to advise you, because it's going to be a full on sort of process, and as Helen said, she's going to look at a project manager to manage that whole process, so we can give you the best advice and you can give us the best advice as we make our way forward. But there's a lot of very tricky issues to be talked about.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sorry.
To add to that, this last week, and this will be very much dependent upon your decision today, I, as your Chief Executive, have been invited to participate in the National Three Water Steering Group. So clearly it will be an ability for us to really understand what the government are thinking and be able to influence and shape that.
Yanni, Jimmy, and Pauline, and
thank you.
Phil and James.
I had several questions. I was just keen to understand, has the water supply implementation plan and the delivery phase 1 projects been discussed with Ngāi Tahu and Mana Whenua?
The Delivery 1 projects have been discussed with iwi, and that's why they have been altered and reprioritised slightly. Obviously also to meet the objectives of council and our broader community. So if you, the long list, I think, help me Helen, added up to about 129 million.
Yes.
So it'd be nice for government to give us more, really, double the amount we could have easily spent. But so then, basically we looked and we gave you the criteria on what we prioritise, but then we had discussions both with council and whatever to generate the list that's up there today.
So the Papatipu Runanga has seen the list of projects in Delivery 1 and kind of agreed on what should go forward, or kind of have been silent?
No, they've not opposed it, as is outlined in the letter.
Okay.
However, in response to those conversations, we increased the amount of money going into the needs assessments for small communities, because that was their overriding concern.
Okay. And have we talked to Ngāi Tahu about a joint work program where they actually share in some of the funding?
That's a matter for the next phase. So there has been expressed some interest from Ngāi Tahu in engaging in the next phase in terms of the entities, but that's a much bigger question than is being addressed in this report.
Right.
As part 1 also, there's $30 million put aside that is accessible to water supply that aren't local government, and that is open to Marae. So we've given a undertaking to Ngāi Tahu that if they would like our support in helping put an application in or registering interest, we will help them support that. And recognise we've been out, we've spent quite a few, some of our water specialists have been out onto a number of maraes talking about variety issues, even before this all came up.
Yeah.
So we've already got that liaison. So
I get that. I guess the thing that I'm struggling to understand is, in our integrated strategy, we talked about working with Mana Whenua and Ngāi Tahu, and we talked about having joint work programs put in place. I guess what I'm really interested in is when because we haven't seen the implementation plan for the water supply, if there's anything in there in that implementation plan that we would want to do in stage 1. One of the things that comes to mind, for example, is the reuse of rainwater. So was there any consideration given to a project to incentivise the use of rainwater and for it to be reused as part of...
I think there's two things, and we set out the criteria that we've got at the front. Government was very specific that they wanted to concentrate on water and wastewater for a start, and they had to be shovel ready. So we are exploring a variety of options, but we had to put a list up that we knew we had confidence that we could deliver within the timetables, that we can put through our capital delivery program and actually deliver. And there's some big money in there. There's $40 million. It's actually, over the 18 months or something, we're talking about just under $1 million a week that we need to spend to deliver that program. So we needed to make sure they're shovel ready. It doesn't stop us exploring, having those ongoing conversations about a variety of different delivery mechanisms.
So given that we haven't seen the implementation plan, is there anything in there you think that we will be asked to do separate from what's in phase 1 that will require additional funding?
So the water supply strategic plan, which is the implementation plan, primarily So it addresses two major things. One is it addresses the water supply issues in a strategic sense, and particularly around water sources. And included in that is alternative sources of water. And when you talk about rainwater tanks, that's a particular application in Banks Peninsula where we are short of water, and that is one option for small communities on Banks Peninsula. It's not one that we're looking at seriously for the city, where supply is not the most pressing issue. The other aspect of that plan is that it meets the requirements of our water take consents from Environment Canterbury. So that also requires us to look ahead in terms of source water protection and security of supply for those communities. So it does address those things directly, and it doesn't go though so far as to identify particular projects to be implemented this year. So it's not in that detailed sense.
You'll have projects to be implemented next year.
We've got projects that we're implementing already, but they are in line with the general principles of that strategic plan rather than an itemised action list.
Okay, so by the time we get the implementation plan, if there's things in there that we want to do that we currently don't have budget for, is there any ability to reconsider what's in delivery phase 1, or is that once we've signed the funding agreement completely locked in?
That is completely locked in.
Okay.
However, there is a little bit of money at a program level within the Three Waters.
Okay.
Thank
Business
you.
as usual,
I've got
if you like.
Jimmy
Just a
and
final-
Pauline, Phil and James.
Just a final question on the integrated strategy. And I appreciate that you've highlighted where possibly what we're doing is inconsistent, but one thing that you haven't done is actually highlighted where we are consistent, and that is in the implementation, or there's a section 8 that says collaboration with other territorial authorities to retain control of public water infrastructure. So can I just ask that we actually put that in that section as well, so it does actually, the strategy does actually provide for what we're doing, and it would be nice just to call that out specifically.
Sorry, what are you saying?
In our integrated strategy, we have a statement that says collaboration with other territorial authorities. We will continue to collaborate and share information with other city and district councils, LGNZ and central government, and we'll continue to advocate for ensuring local communities have control over the provision of public water infrastructure to achieve effective integration. And just in that point where they've highlighted that actually there's a piece in the strategy that may be inconsistent, I thought it would be also good to highlight that we did actually acknowledge in that strategy that we would collaborate with our neighbours. It just gives it a bit more balance. That's all. Sorry, I didn't pick that up earlier, otherwise I would have raised it. But
Yes.
Yeah, well,
Yes.
we'll come back to that.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Okay. I have two questions. First one regarding to MOU. MOU we signed. They cover scope is 21, 2 and 3, am I right? Or just 21?
Just tranche 1.
Okay, 21, that's good. But all the funding, seeking a funding, particular focus on candidate for funding, our request $42.6 million. But we heard from staff, government, central government only grant to us up to the $40.5 million, am I right? This gap, we fill the gap, or they will grant the funding additional, probably the other about $2 million give to us or not.
So the projects that are listed for funding, we don't yet have firm prices for. So
Yeah.
those are the estimated
Yes.
expenditure on those,
Yeah.
and we may get some sharper prices. So some of those projects may come in at less than the number in the table, and we want to ensure that we have sufficient projects to deliver the full 40.5 million. So that's why the list of projects, the estimate is larger than the amount of funding that we expect to get.
Also, this MOU is separate from all the kind of the candidate list, am I right? That's waiting for when the CE, to sign those funding agreement. That's a part of attachment document. And
Yeah.
the delivery plan,
The delivery plan would be attached, yes.
detail, there's a detail.
The detailed
Okay.
delivery plan,
If
yes.
that's true, I'm concerned because this one is part of the long-term plan consultation, am I right? But at moment 22 and 23, we have not yet any candidate.
No.
How much funding we will get from central
No,
government?
this is independent from the long-term plan.
Total difference.
Yes, so that some of these projects have been drawn from the long-term plan and will be delivered ahead of what would otherwise happen through the long-term plan.
But our consultation based on the recommendation is part of long-term plan process.
Yes.
Consultation
So there will
process.
be further consultation as part of the long-term process, as part of the long-term plan process.
Okay, but the list is a new revised list, not the original long-term plan, the list.
That's
from the
correct.
start
We'll have to
from-
This
revise.
is quite separate from
Yeah,
the
separate.
LTP. Thank you.
Okay,
Anne?
thank you.
A couple of questions are really about delivery. Are we confident that we can deliver this? I know that it's going to create a lot of jobs and it's going to be terrific for our local economy, but how will we, you were following from Aaron's question about jobs and getting people to do this work. What sort of work is being done around that?
Yes, we are confident that we can deliver, and we are already gearing up for that delivery. So we have, so first of all, we've framed up a job description for the Water Reform Program Manager to oversee the delivery and to report on it. And so that work has already been done, and if Council agrees to this today, then that will go into production immediately. We also, because the long-term plan deferred a whole lot of projects, we are ready to roll on those projects, and there are a large number of contractors and consulting firms around the city who are looking at the work that is to be funded by the 761 million across the country and are gearing up for that as well. So yes, we are confident that we can deliver.
Our delivery model incorporates panels which have people already signed up with the expertise, safety and whatever, and we can put them very quickly to those panels and ask for a variety of different tender prices, and then that speeds up the procurement as well. So they are ready to do that, and we have specialist panels that deliver a variety of those different works, so we can actually up and down the amount that we put. Probably they're disappointed when they saw the annual plan because we had reduce some of them. This certainly, if we signed up today, would make them
Happy.
Pauline. Maybe.
Thank you. My question is that, if we join Tranche 1 today, we're agreeing to work with our neighbours to consider the creation of multi-regional entities. My question is, which regions will we work with initially? This is going to be a very big piece of work. It's actually three questions. Which regions will we work with? Will that funding of 100k for us be enough in your view? Because I'm wondering actually about that. And will basically 8 months be long enough to complete that work? It's a big piece of work. In your view, those three questions.
To the first question, we've already begun working with our neighbours, and through the Canterbury Mayoral Forum, this council has already agreed with those discussions to take place across Canterbury in the first instance.
So just Canterbury?
And inviting councils on the West Coast and in the top of the South Island to join, and those councils have accepted that invitation and have joined in that discussion. I think that it's not limited to that though. We should also look to have discussions with councils in the bottom of the South Island. Yeah. So it's that discussion is not limited. It's an open discussion. So your second question was, is the 100,000 enough? At the moment, the 100,000 is set aside as this council's contribution, and other councils would also be expected to make a contribution to the discussion and the associated business cases. And I would not be surprised to see central government also making a contribution to that discussion and to assisting and supporting councils in developing business cases and identifying the issues and the opportunities that arise, because they won't be different in all places across the country. There will be some differences, but there will be more similarities than differences. So we can learn from the conversations that have already happened in the Hawke's Bay and in the Waikato, for example. Right. And I've lost your third question, sorry.
With the time frame, you take Christmas out of the equation, it probably leaves 7 or 8 months for that piece of work by the time we get to making a decision about Tranche 2 at the end of June.
It's certainly enough time to have some very significant discussions. I mean, the outline of the reform program is quite prescriptive. So the central government has done a lot of work identifying what the issues are and what it wants to achieve. And what it's asking now is for the councils to engage in how that can be delivered and what the options are for delivering on those objectives. Yes, I think it's enough time to have a very good start of that conversation. It won't be the end of it, but it will be a beginning. And I think the real challenge is engaging with our communities and engaging with iwi and runanga across the country as well.
So basically the timeframes are ambitious, aren't they?
Yes, they are ambitious.
Thanks, Ian.
Ngātahu also raised a challenge for us to actually think about a model across their Takawai. So we are actually, that will involve discussions obviously down to the bottom of the South Island. That will be part of that conversation, I would imagine, because I imagine Ngātahu will be having it amongst the runanga up and down the country, I'm not sure. But that certainly was an issue that was raised that we will further explore between Tranche 1 and Tranche 2. And doing that, we'll have to have discussions, I think, with authorities outside of Canterbury.
I mean, the other thing too is I'm finding, and it's perhaps not a question for today, but it does lead into the Tranche 2 conversations, and it's about, I'm finding the information about where the assets sit is quite confusing, because sometimes they'll say that the assets will be retained in public ownership, but then other times they'll say that the entities will own the assets and be responsible for owning and maintaining, and it's quite confusing about
and
where
the
the assets sit.
Aren't mutually exclusive. Basically what they're saying is they'll be transferred to the company, but the company would be in public ownership is really what they are looking. And it's not going to be a company, it's going to be a new statutory entity. But what they're saying is that will not be privatised, that will remain as owned by councils or owned somehow by the public. And so that will be one of the models. So you can do both. They be assets so they can leverage off their balance sheet, but equally it can have full ownership, and it may make some rules, I'm not sure, that is absolutely impossible to sell.
And then that will be part of this work that we're embarking on between now and June.
That will be part of the
conversation. And all that.
That I imagine Dawn will put forward to a working group if that happens to be there.
Phil, James.
Hi, thank you guys. Just in case I'm getting confused, the one at the top of the funding thing is that for WS as water supply?
Yes, WS water supply and WW wastewater.
Yeah. But in my view, that 5 odd mil seems a lot of money for a water main. I was thinking if it was a sewer main, it'd be a lot deeper and it would cost.
That's a program of works in that area rather than a specific. We haven't. I did have a description, but I haven't brought it down. It's actually expanded, and you'll have a look at that one. Have a look at the last one, WW Mains Renewal. It's got a whole range of streets there.
Those
so
ones.
It's a program of works to do in a area, and that's how we do.
Okay, and I just thought that there's just
it's not one water main, no.
Okay, and the other question is with the panels or whatever. So is it invited tender or public tender?
Basically, the panels are open to the public. They register and then they come onto a panel depending on they've got to get past health and safety requirements, expertise and all the rest of it. Mm-hmm. And those panels get renewed periodically, and so people apply. And so we have different panels for different sized jobs and different expertise. So some contractors sit on a variety of, some might sit on every panel, the bigger ones, maybe the likes of Fulton Hogan's, and then others that are specialist drainage company will sit on that panel and that panel. So it's...
So you're happy there's enough people there's enough scope of contractors on the panel to get competitive? It's not sort of a closed shop, I shouldn't say that, but you know what I mean?
A good example being, however, there are some things that don't go through the panel. Helen talked about the smart network, that we don't have a panel for that because that's a one-off one-off specialist procurement. So panels for the routine stuff, because it speeds everything up. Mm-hmm. And periodically we re-tender those panels and they get reported up to the Finance and Performance Committee about what amount of work goes through those panels and how it's done. But within there, we tender within the panels so we get a competitive price.
Okay, thank you.
James?
Kia ora. Look, my question was addressed by you before, David, about the Ngaitahu Takiwā. That's why I've asked for that to be brought up. And yes, you were at the meeting that I was at too. The Takiwā would be the bottom half of the South Island with just a V out of the top. Now, what say do we have in those in setting those regions?
I think we will do analysis on those various regions, but we would be no different to anyone else. I presume at some stage we would be putting our view forward and basically probably the decision maker would be the Crown. I'm not quite sure. It depends on whether the approach the Crown wants to take, whether it's how collaborative and how directive, I suppose, it wants to be. But certainly we are intending to incorporate the analysis of that. And if you have a think of Ngātahu, it does create a little bit of a problem for Marlborough and Nelson. I think Marlborough and Tasman are the two that are split by that V. The rest of it, if you take all the West Coast, Southland, Otago and Canterbury, are all incorporated within that wider. So, yeah, it's just one of those options that we would have a look at and be able to analyse on in partnership, I think.
Yeah, ka aroha to them, but that Tasman, on the right-hand side, that Tasman region incorporates their bit, and we just take the back Te Tai Potini, the west coast.
It cuts out that bottom, it cuts out a little bit of their area, and it cuts out a little bit of Marlborough, my understanding. We did bring up a slide that had the two together, but again, as far as I know, there's no decisions been made about that. So, you know, we need to be in the tent so we can participate fully on looking at the options, and hopefully the Crown is going to bring in iwi on their level, and potentially Ngātahu's view may be no different to a number of other tribes up and down the country. I don't know that, but yeah.
Well, I'd like us to consider that seriously, because that makes total sense in terms of governing the area. You know, we don't need to be. I mean, we can incorporate the Southern district easily. Okay, so I just want to put that on the table now, that we should have a view on this as a council. I mean. Okay.
And we'll certainly be exploring that option and bringing those back to you. Central government's obviously exploring a variety of different options. I have seen all of the South Island. There's certainly that model they've been exploring. I haven't actually seen a model that's Crowners, but I'm hoping that they open up the discussions with iwi. It may be a position that iwi puts onto the table at the Crown level, as well as us putting it at a council level.
Okay. The last thing I'll say then is that the Crown agreed that boundary, that takiwa, with that V in the top. So, you know, I'd expect that they would be mindful of why we're even looking at that. Okay.
Could I just add then, just because we're talking about Ngāi and its takiwa, they do have a whole of South Island view specific to their takiwa. But I think the outcomes that Ngāi would want to deliver are no different to some of the outcomes that other iwi would want to deliver. So if there was a whole of island concept, then that would embrace the Nelson above Nelson Lakes area and the other iwi. But potentially there is an option, you know, that could split away and be managed by another entity. Enough for discussion post tranche 1.
Okay. I just have a question around the point that I think Yanni raised, which is when we get to the recommendation that says, it's the recommendation in relation to the Section 80. So 6.10, the advice of the Legal Services Unit is that a decision made on these grounds would comply with the provisions of Section 80. No, sorry, that's not 6.10. I've taken 6.10 out of there. The actual wording on the recommendations. Can we scroll back to, go the other direction? Yeah. Keep going. Yeah, J. So a decision to enter into the MOU would comply with the provisions of Section 80 of the Local Government Act for the reasons set out in this report. It doesn't specifically call out why that is important. It refers to the generic statement but not the specific. So do we need to say something like noting the mechanism for resolving the inconsistency with one of the objectives of the integrated water strategy? because unless we specifically call out that there is an inconsistency, it's an inconsistency with one of the objectives that is stated in the integrated water strategy, but it's there is a mechanism for resolving that.
Yes, yes, we can clarify that. We can identify the reasons why we're not, the decision is inconsistent with the water strategy. That's easy to put in there. I can clarify that for you.
So is it better to do it that way, or to actually write in there that the MOU gets us to work collaboratively with government, etc., on a regional structure? I mean, I'm just trying to be really crystal clear that what people are agreeing to.
Well, I think it's clear that we're agreeing to the MOU, and that's been set out clearly. The only issue around the Section 80 was the provision in the integrated water strategy that can't lay my hands on it.
6.5.2.
Yeah, that the strategy says that we want the water to be controlled by the people of Christchurch.
No, it doesn't. It says that we oppose the separation of any water functions from the City Council. So it actually isn't against the principle, because controlled by the people of Christchurch is slightly different set of wording that sits in there. You can control it without being the deliverer of the functions, if you see what I mean. So it's really the 6.5.2 which is problematic.
I agree, and that's why we've made reference to Section 80, so that that validates the decision that we want to go into the MOU and explore all those options.
Yeah.
So it's quite discreet in terms of what it's intended to achieve. It just ticks that particular compliance
So
box.
it doesn't need anything additional, no additional wording?
I don't think so.
Okay, no, as long as it's all crystal clear what people are... Yeah, okay, cool.
Also stay in the strategy that we will collaborate with our partnering TAs. So that's also in the strategy. So.
Yeah, but
which we are doing and
which
have
we're
been
doing
for a number of months now.
All right. Okay, well, I'm happy to move that, except for I want to change the word concern to disappointment, so that it mirrors the wording from the Runanga. Yeah, expressing council's disappointment with the lack of consultation. Yeah. So I'll move that. Do I have a seconder? James Daniels. Right. Any discussion? Andrew? Eh?
Thank you. I particularly note the letters from the Papatipa Runanga, and I particularly note the requests in those letters, and I also note that they're consistent with the recommendations that are in front of us today. Having said that, I do look forward to further deep discussions with the Runanga following on from today's decision. So I see no reason why we shouldn't agree to sign the Tranche 1 documents today. It puts us firmly in the tent for the future conversations and discussions, but we need to realise that as we sign up for this stage in good faith, we need to approach Tranche 2 with our eyes and minds wide open. So assuming we do decide to sign up to Tranche 1 today, we've got significant further work in front of us, many questions that need to be answered, and a huge amount of further information that needs to be provided before we can even begin to consider what our position might be on Tranche 2. The timeframes are ambitious, and we do need to properly engage with communities and potential partners and be working closely with iwi and Runanga as we work through this next significant stage of work. But in terms of the Tranche 1 requirement to share information and to work constructively, my assumption is that that's exactly what we would be doing anyway. In terms of the $20 million funding contribution, which I would expect to be 40 million when the required number of councils do sign up across the region, this represents a great opportunity to carry out further work, particularly on renewals and on maintenance, improving water assets, improving service delivery. And I note the comments from staff regarding getting on with this quickly. And I would absolutely encourage progressing this programme of work as quickly as we possibly can. And I look forward to the reports coming back to the committee so that we can keep a good level of oversight over this work. So it's good to see the revised list in front of us today in the appendix, including a number of projects that meet the shovel-ready criteria, which also respond to the Runanga priorities we talked about at the Te Hononga workshop last week. These include the needs assessment, focusing on small communities and settlements, and a total of 5.3 million of additional work in Devotionals and Akaroa. These will have positive effects on the health of the Akaroa Harbour and reflect some of the conversations that we've had with Runanga about their priorities. And I hope that this will also then set us up well for a good faith and collaborative approach to those future conversations that we need to be having with iwi and Runanga, thinking about how we can best work with them as we move through the next stage. So whilst our position on Tranche 2 remains to be informed, signing the Tranche 1 MOU, I believe, is good for Christchurch, and I support the recommendations that are in front of us today and urge others to do the same.
Thank you. Yanni?
Yeah, thank you. In some ways, we're having to do this because of central government's timing rather than our own. So, you know, I'm not against seeking to get the funding from central government. We do need funding, and we do need to go through a process in order to do that. But I think one of the really important things to highlight here is the fact that this council has an integrated water strategy, and that was setting out what we would do. And it was built on the foundation of developing implementation plans, and that was adopted in September last year. And I know that we've had COVID-19, but we were going to have an implementation plan within 6 months of agreeing to that strategy. And I've heard a lot of discussion around being critical of government around the engagement of Māori, and I acknowledge that. But actually nothing prevented us from engaging with Māori, as per our integrated water strategy, with both Ngāi Tahu and the Papatipu Runanga, as set in our integrated water strategy, well ahead of where we've got to today. And it does feel quite rushed coming in at the last minute rather than actually doing the things that we've already asked to do as a council. So I just want to acknowledge that actually we had already made a commitment to engage, and we really need to do that around our implementation plan. There's some projects in our integrated strategy that have been picked up in the phase 1. There's others that are not mentioned at all. And I think I look forward to getting that implementation plan in front of us so we can consider what things should be improved. Fundamentally though, I think what's really important as a city, and this is certainly what was reflected in the submissions, is that water is a precious taonga and it deserves to be protected as such. So I think whatever we do, we always need to come back to the fact that this water is a treasure, and we need to be considered about how we approach any loss of ownership or control in terms of how it's delivered. But I will support what's been put in front of us today because we need the funding. And I will conclude with saying that actually when we adopted the integrated strategy, we made a specific request to have information on our website and through other communication channels explaining to the community what was happening in regards to the delivery of it. And I think one of the real key issues going forward is we've got a whole bunch of different processes being engaged on without clarity with our community about who's responsible for what decisions and when. And so I hope going forward from today, if we agree to this, that we can put something on our website that clearly articulates where our role is as decision makers and where the community fits in, so that they can be fully aware of the processes, so that they know who's responsible for what, and that we do get really good transparency around what we're trying to achieve. Because I think at the moment there's a huge risk that people simply do not understand because of the whole diversity of processes that are currently underway in regards to our water. Thank you.
Jimmy, Sarah, Melanie.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I support to sign the 21 of these three waters, the service reform, because this we consider their objective, particular emphasis. So this kind of reform, can improve those safety and the quality of drinking water services. Also increase the resilience of these three water service provision. So that's quite a very crucial. Not only the Havelock knows the instant this case, even in Canterbury or Christchurch, more or less, we have this the situation. So this I totally agree. This kind of the objective. The other one is after the COVID-19 pandemic. Actually we need funding. We need funding for this kind of COVID-19 recovery. That's very, very crucial, important. 21, we are all aware, have more than $40 million. So give us opportunity, to support those economic recovery, particularly to create more job, the opportunity, more kind of employee. That's very, very crucial, and also can increase, maintain, and acceptance investment. That's fantastic. But only I go with the Andrew and Yanni one. It's concerned the consultation. Because if we review the staff, the presentation, particular key feature of the reform is, coordinate and also consultation with the EV and the rural and also community voice. But looks like in the beginning, the government just ignored the kind of the communication with the rural about these ones. But these are 21. But the 22 or 3, we still have the opportunity from now on until the end of the June of the next year. Still opportunity, to have strengthened this communication. That should be the very crucial and important. The other one is part of the long-term plan, 2021 to 31, the consultation, and give the all these candidates to the list to the public, to the community. They can feedback to us, give us more confidence, to support this one. So I, generally speaking, I support this the signature. But anyway, after the particular dedicated to the CE, to present, assign the funding agreement and deliver a plan, there will be more implementable regarding to this the kind of reform. That's also very, very crucial and important. Thank you.
Sarah.
Just very briefly, I completely understand the government's desire to make sure that all New Zealanders have access to safe drinking water and fit-for-purpose wastewater services. But I am wary of the speed of the proposed reforms and the lack of early community and iwi engagement on them. There is a risk of poor outcomes and a backlash when significant changes like this are rushed. It is essential, however, that we are around the table as these reforms are discussed, to inform, to influence, to push for greater engagement, and to make sure that we get the best outcomes for our water and our residents.
Melanie, Phil, Pauline.
Sorry, I support going into tranche 1 and signing the MOU with the government, and agree with all the comments really that have been said so far. There was the quote from our integrated water strategy that's in the document about the council considering water to be so precious and highly significant to the people of Christchurch, so we want it to be controlled by the people of Christchurch, and I think we all believe that. And I note the last resolution, number 8, that proposes consultation with the community during the long-term plan process, which will be coming up very soon. So I think the next year for the people of Christchurch is probably going to be the most important year ever for people to be making sure that their voice is heard around water in our region.
Phil, Pauline.
Yeah, I'll definitely be supporting this. I think it's great that we're getting money given to us from outside our pair of trousers, so to speak, so Helen and Dave can spend it on ageing water things infrastructure that's underground. And just because it's underground doesn't mean to say it's not knackered. We sort of sometimes focus on having nicer things on top, but forget about what's broken underneath. So I'll definitely be supporting this today. Thank you.
Okay, Pauline.
Thanks. Suspicious but grateful. And that was a phrase coined by one of the groups at the DIA workshop I attended, and that's kind of stuck with me, and I'm sorry I can't remember which group it was, but it's a good phrase. You know, by signing this MOU today, we're actually committing to the principles and objectives of working together with central government through the first stage of any reform program. And this entails working with neighbouring councils to consider the benefits or not of creating multi-regional entities for the improvements of Three Waters delivery. And this will involve open communication, openly sharing information, and we know that this funding will not need to be repaid if the council does not ultimately commit to subsequent stages of the reform program, providing that we meet the terms of the funding agreement and the delivery plan. And it's really comforting to know that Dawn, our Chief Executive, is now on the National Steering Group, and that's a very welcome piece of news. So signing the MOU today will release the $40 million for us, just slightly over, and that's very helpful to us because we did reduce our spend in the Three Waters by $60 million in our annual plan. Yes, it's a carrot, but personally I feel comfortable that we're not bound to progress any further should we choose not to. And with the work that we'll embark on over the next year, that will provide us with an evidence-based information to enable a good decision on whether we move on with agreeing to an entity or not. And I'd really like to thank staff for being so ready with the proposed projects today and assuring us that we can deliver. I'm in no doubt that I'll be very, very cautious about embarking on tranche 2 and 3. If we don't embark on tranche 2, there is no tranche 3, but that work is yet to come. So for today, I can't see any issue with signing up to this MOU.
Thank you. Sam and Jake.
That's working. Yeah, look, I can be brief as well. I think this is actually a really positive step for the city, and I think before we get too carried away with tranche 2 and the control that may bring from other entities, we need to be really clear that we're doing this on our terms. I don't think we should look a gift horse in the mouth. We should take the money and run. In my view, with this, there's a lot of work that needs to be done across the city and severe underinvestment, and this just seems like a really good opportunity. So I think, for the public concern around the loss of control over our water, and obviously, the concerns around government's engagement with iwi, look, they are concerning, but I think the message should be that actually, we can walk away from this if it doesn't meet our expectations in a year's time as we work through that. So I think the staff have done a good job in getting to this point. The real challenge should be for the next 5 or 6 weeks is to get that delivery plan up and running and get that money into the bank. So we really should get on with it, and it's a positive step forward for the city.
Thank you, Jake.
Look, I think it's a no-brainer that we should collect this money. We can't really turn down that kind of cash for our community. But as Andrew eloquently said, we need to keep our eyes open and be mindful of the lifetime cost of these proposals, because what Christchurch absolutely does not want is cross-subsidisation, and what we do not want is losing control, because in a regional body that could take in the whole Upper South Island, their priorities aren't going to be the same as our priorities. Their priority may not be on water chlorination and making sure that we have our pristine chlorine-free drinking water. And we don't want to see another bloated bureaucracy, the likes of Watercare with their CE on $700,000 and delivering poor performances. And also we don't want to see volumetric charging here in Christchurch as well. We don't charge the same for water all over New Zealand. And I think that's really important. But as I say, look, there's a long way to go. There's lots of options on the table, but I think we need to be really clear with central government that we are not going to sign up to a deal that is not best for Christchurch first and foremost.
Thank you. Aaron?
I don't like to look a gift horse in the mouth. The idea of collecting tens of millions of dollars to go towards that infrastructure makes perfect sense. But there is no such thing as free money. I don't like the way that this is happening. Havelock North was a tragedy, but there's lots of other tragedies that come our way as a city and as a nation. And this one, the takeover of big centralised water for the whole country sits uneasy with me. Councils have delivered it in this city safely for a very long time. From asking the medical officer of health, no one's ever got sick from Christchurch's water in the past. I think we've done well. Yes, it's not perfect, but there's a good way to go. The current mantra of demonstrably safe, I don't buy into because we haven't had a conversation with our public. I think we won't get to a point where we will be chlorine free because that carrot just keeps moving. Those goalposts keep changing, and I don't think we will get there because there's a plan already in place. It's a plan that hasn't been transparent. It's a plan that hasn't involved iwi across the country, and it's been done wrong. It's been done to the people, and to go along with it is to go along with something that I fundamentally disagree with. Obviously, the odd one out today because everyone's going to take the money and run, and that's your right to do, and that is financially the right thing for our city to do. But when it comes to water, I think people in Christchurch are quite passionate, and I just can't, absolutely can't support it when the conversation should have begun down here with Ngāi Tahu, absolutely, and it's a conversation could have taken days, whatever, but that's where it starts before you reform water. It's offensive to not do it that way. And over the last 2.5 years since I went to the first Water NZ roadshow that went throughout, it was pretty obvious this was coming. You could see it then. I've got photos of the slides in my phone still. I looked them up before. So it's pretty obvious that this was coming, and it's going to keep coming. And it started out, it was only a few $1 million then. Now it's somewhere between 10 and 45. So that's $1 billion, that is, which is a phenomenal amount of money. And 3 people died in Havelock North. To put that into perspective, that's how many people die of suicide every day and a half in New Zealand.
Is there anyone else? No one else? Okay, well, I'll just close off the debate. This is really, well, can I start off by saying that I actually appreciate the concerns that the government has identified. If I was still sitting around the cabinet table, I would be concerned at the extent of, the lack of resilience and infrastructure throughout the country. And it's not just Christchurch that they're looking at, they're looking right across the country. And when you look at the essentially billions of dollars that would be required to address some of the issues that are evident in different parts of the country, then it's not surprising that they want to take some action. Can I just say that this started, the Three Waters Review started before Havelock North happened. Havelock North was something that happened that turned the focus away from the Three Waters and firmly on the drinking water, which is why we have a drinking water regulator. I am concerned about the lack of engagement, particularly with Te Runanga o Ngāi Tahu, because of its extensive coverage of the waterways and its large coastal environment and landmass. So I do support a reference to the question of raising disappointment with central government about that lack of engagement. That being said, I do think that if we think back to the time of the earthquakes, the council of the day decided to spend money that it had set aside for renewals on repairing its infrastructure. Now, that one decision that was made by the council is still being paid for by us today, because what the cost-sharing agreement that was signed up to just a matter of months before I was elected as the mayor, what that cost-sharing agreement did was that it said that only the government would only contribute 60-40 to the cost of the essential network. So that meant that everything else that was broken or damaged as a result of the earthquakes was not repaired under the SCIRT program. So we're paying a price for that. And it wasn't a price that the council of the day thought they were signing up to either. They thought that they were going to be saving the council a lot of money. In actual fact, the candidates who were elected found a $400 million hole in the council's budget. So I think if we are to reflect on where we've come from, we've actually come an incredibly long way over the last few years to address some of the major challenges that this city was left with as a result of the earthquakes. what the government's done now, and Aaron Kewen is absolutely right, the government has signalled the changes that they've wanted to see in terms of the delivery of water services for some time now. So it isn't any surprise. I think what has taken the Papatipu Runanga by surprise, and us too, was the kind of the quid pro quo element that was added in terms of shovel-ready projects. We know that the government was looking for shovel-ready projects. We actually suggested to them that a cost-sharing agreement would be the best way forward because it helped us move forward at the time of the earthquakes. This is very much in line with that thinking, and I don't think that it's unreasonable for us to revisit the whole question of where we go in the future by signing up to the Memorandum of Understanding. We do so with an open mind, we do so in good faith, and we do so on the basis of working in a collaborative way. I too am very pleased that our Chief Executive is going to sit on the steering group. Nationally, that means that we will have direct input, and I think we need to work in a collaborative way with central government, with our neighbouring authorities, and with anyone else who wants to come to the party. But Ngāi Tahu, our Papatipu Runanga, they have to sit at the table as we design our way through to the future, and I think that's the very strong message that I got from the letter that has been sent. And to indicate to government that they've got a willing partner in Ngāi Tahu and with our Papatipu Runanga in terms of finding those solutions, I think is the right thing for us to be doing as a council. So on that point, I shall put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. Aaron Kewen opposed. And if we could just... it's 11:07. We don't need a tea break, do we? No. Right, we'll move on to the Three Waters Section 17A review. Item number 5. We've got Martin Matthews representing the External Governance Group joining the meeting by audio-visual link. Hello, Martin. Hello. Can you hear me?
Martin hasn't got audio shown.
Martin, are you able to hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, good. Right. Well, I'm about to hand over to you to make the presentation. Is that right?
We'll begin.
I think council officers were going to
begin. Right. Sorry. Thank you.
Good morning. Helen Beaumont, Head of Three Waters, to introduce the Section 17A review and to remind councillors that, well, it's titled Section 17A review, which sounds terribly bureaucratic, this is all about ensuring the best value for ratepayers from the services that we deliver. And so what we have done is evaluate the cost effectiveness of the systems and options for delivering Three Waters services, for the governance and for the funding of those services. And while this began back in the middle of 2019, it has been considered in parallel with the government reform program, which we've just been talking about. So it has not been done in isolation. We have been considering what's been happening in parallel. And I'll hand over to Teresa, who led the review team. Thanks, Teresa.
Thanks, Helen. Why we've completed this review. The trigger for a Section 17A, or the trigger that we had, was the major operations and maintenance contracts coming to the end of their term for all Three Waters. It's, as Helen has mentioned, an opportunity to understand the challenges facing Three Water service delivery, and also identify in turn where changes in governance, funding and service delivery are able to address those challenges. As Helen again noted, it was done at a point where we already knew the writing on the wall around central government reform. We didn't know how quickly things were going to progress, but the way in which we put together the objectives for the review was to make sure that we would be in the best place in terms of our preparedness and our best structure to respond to the reform programme. So the objectives that were agreed by the Finance and Performance Committee of the whole for this review, the first one is very much along the straight lines of a Section 17A in the Local Government Act around evaluating cost effectiveness.
of the three waters, and in recognition of our strategic framework and community outcomes. And the additional one was added in around the cost effectiveness to the Canterbury region, and the options of it back to Christchurch City Council. The first objective was really within the boundaries of our council and has, in our opinion, been achieved. The second one is ongoing and has gained significant momentum now. The key challenges identified in the review, they've been noted a number of times during the prior discussion. The challenges, I know that there was mention of Havelock North, but the challenges that have been identified are very much along the same lines as what's been identified across the country. Absolutely, there are some differences, but really they're about the state and funding the risks to water. Undervaluing has led to underinvestment. Christchurch City does face the same challenges that have been identified at central government level. The third one looked more across the board around the regulatory reform, but also around the cultural expectations and longer term challenges around climate change that are going to just, without intervention, would just increase the impact of challenges 1 and 2 further. And this is where it gets slightly complicated. The options that we've put forward now, we had the original Section 17A review where there were 4 options, which was a status quo, a standalone business unit for drinking water and wastewater, a council-controlled organisation that would not own the assets, and a full asset-owning CCO. The original recommendation in June 2020 was to transition to a standalone business unit, but the pace of the reform programme that was outlined in July 2020, after this review was completed, meant that we have reviewed those recommendations in light of the timeframe, and there's a second option now to retain the status quo with the support mechanisms in place to support our council during the central government reform programme. So in terms of those 2 options, the advantages and disadvantages, won't read them all out, but in terms of retaining the status quo, the advantages here are all outlined in the Section 17A around the control of council. I know that's been mentioned a few times during the discussion for the first, around the MOU. It also reduces it means we can focus on the central government reform programme without any other need around internal restructure. So it just increases the specific focus on the reform programme, but that's also around engaging with other authorities, with Ngāi Tahu and local rūnanga, and also around preparing our own council for change with a minimal impact to staff minimising immediate impact. The disadvantages is it doesn't actually, it wasn't the recommendation out of the Section 17A review because it doesn't address the challenges. It doesn't even start to address the challenges outlined in the review. However, although we could see the writing on the wall of central government reform, we didn't know that we were going to have COVID-19 or that we were going to have central government shovel-ready funding. So some of the disadvantages that were there for status quo, they obviously didn't allow for us potentially having $40 million and more to support the, to start addressing some of the challenges that were raised in the review. So option 2, our original recommendation, kind of the opposite to the last one. So really this was the agreed preferred way forward out of the review, that because it does enable some elements of the challenges to be addressed within council whilst also best preparing our council for the reform programme. The key elements were around a sort of a semi-autonomous management and more commercial focus by separating it out into its own unit, and it had the opportunity around delegated governance. The disadvantages are around around the timeframes. Those advantages were all under the expectation that we would have at least a few years to realise those benefits. And there is a small amount of cost that's specific around the establishment unit and independent governance that would not be required for option 1. And I should note that there are people that are challenged by a standalone business unit just because it's an unusual organisational hierarchy. It has worked really well in other organisations, but it can cause confusion and transition challenges if not managed effectively. So the recommendation, as noted originally in June, and that's what our Three Waters, the Section 17A review documents note, we recommend as a standalone business unit, but updated as of today as to retain status quo, and continuing to support the Mayoral Forum and engagement with Ngāi Tahu and local runanga and the community. And what's really important is not just the status quo. An internal staff working group is absolutely vital. It enables some of the challenges that would have been addressed for a standalone business unit, but mainly around the preparedness for our council and involvement in the reform. So a little bit more on the internal staff working group. Helen has already outlined the need for a programme manager. That's really important that this is put through a formalised programme that links up all of the different elements around reform. We need to understand the true cost of drinking water and wastewater service delivery for ourselves as Christchurch, as part of this transition and, well, as part of the reform. We need to understand it for ourselves. And we need to understand the dependencies of the two waters with the rest of council operations. The second one is around advice to support council for the central government reform programme and our contribution to the Mayoral Forum. They are currently preparing an RFP to go to tender to support each of the Mayoral Forum councils for the multi-regional review, and then preparing our business case. We note at the bottom around preparing progress reports, so the way of providing updates would be through the Three Waters Infrastructure and Environment Committee, bi-monthly. Impact to the annual plan, I think Pauline mentioned it earlier. The actual contribution would need to be determined as part of the RFP process. We were originally anticipating around 100,000 for our contribution, although there is opportunity for further support from central government that hasn't yet been confirmed. So the next steps, again noting the programme management and the programme being set up. In addition to that, going back to the first slide, we need to finalise our procurement strategy for maintenance contracts for drinking water, wastewater and stormwater, and continue cross-council collaboration around the longer-term impacts that cross over between water and other key services of council. And now over to Martin Martin, and thank you for joining us, Martin, on behalf of our external governance group. They provided the external support and governance across the review, and also, as you're aware, included Andrew and Pauline. So Martin will provide an update. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. Thank you for the opportunity to contribute to your deliberations this morning. I want to acknowledge that I've watched the live stream of your discussion on the last item, so I'm aware of the thinking and decision you've taken on the MOU. I think it's timely that we're considering this matter alongside that, so thank you. I want to acknowledge the initiative that was taken by the Council to conduct the Section 17A review and to undertake it with council officers, including an external governance group of which I was one member. I think from our perspective, the review was a worthwhile one, and I think the council officers have undertaken a very thorough job. The analysis, I think, set out in the reports you have, I provide a very helpful picture of the issues, the risks, and I think also the opportunities for better managing Three Waters in the city. And I think the report shows that doing nothing is not really an option in this domain. As Teresa's talked about, the primary recommendation from the review is the creation of a standalone business unit which would operate inside the council, but which would be very focused on better managing these functions. And I acknowledge that that recommendation was concluded before the government's reform package was announced, but we made that recommendation in the full knowledge that the sort of proposals we now have from them were both likely and imminent. Now, can I just clarify that the way I see the options set out in the 17A review is that they are like a continuum from the status quo through to organisational options with increasing levels of independence and separation from the council, ultimately to a CCO that would be independent and owned. We were aware that, of course, the government would be considering something which might have had a much wider catchment, the Upper South Island or a South Island water body. But I think the recommendation we made, nonetheless, to move to a standalone business unit, we thought was both a desirable and necessary initiative to support the improved management of both drinking and wastewater. So they're dealing with the two waters, addressing a question that was raised in the last item. We felt also that by moving to a standalone business unit as an initial step, this would better position the council to more easily transition along the continuum of options that I've referred to, if and when that was required. Now, the government's reform package means that that transition may now happen more quickly than it might have otherwise been the case. As Teresa's mentioned, the council officers are now recommending effectively the status quo with arrangements to support the Tranche 1 activity with the reform program. We believe, I think, the key consideration for council today is what will be the best initial step for you to be able to most effectively and efficiently manage the expected transition to a wider water organisation if that proposal proceeds after this Tranche 1 activity. The External Governance Group, we remain of the view that creating a standalone business unit is still the right initial step for the council to take. And this is because, firstly, it allows you to clearly identify the assets, the costs, and the other resources that would need to be separated from other council operations, and in a sense to commence that process of change from that understanding. Second, it'll demonstrate both to ratepayers and to the government the council's clear intent to improve the performance and management of these essential community functions. Third, it won't create significant financial burden for the council, but it will allow the smoother and quicker transition of those functions to a new entity if, at the end of Tranche 1, it's decided to proceed with the sort of reform that's being proposed. Alternatively, if that reform does not proceed, at least the groundwork will have been done to be able to better capture the benefits we envisage from creating a standalone business unit. Now, we accept the timetable that the government's set out means that the full implementation of a standalone business unit would seem undesirable and unnecessary until at least those long-term organisational arrangements are settled at the end of Tranche 1 and Tranche 2. So it may not be necessary to implement everything we've recommended. For example, my view is it wouldn't make sense to establish an independent advisory board as part of this initial establishment phase of a business unit. So just to conclude, my view is, and that of the other external members, is that firstly, we've been very impressed by the work that council officers have done with the Section 17A review, and that we stand by our original recommendations. Of course, it's a matter for you to decide what is the most sensible way to now proceed, both to respond to what I think is the need for performance improvement in the management of the three waters, and to be better positioned to deal with whatever changes may now emerge from this next tranche of government reform. Thank you.
Thank you. Are you?
We have to leave it for questions.
You leave it for questions? All
Yes,
right.
thank you.
Okay, questions? Sarah?
Thank you for that. That was really interesting to hear from the external group there. Just wondering, given the time frames now, do you believe that, you've had a really good in-depth look at the organisation as it sits, do you believe that we've got both the time, the resources, the staffing to be able to cope with both the restructure, working out all of the costings and all of the work on the Waters Reform Program at the same time? Yeah, for Martin. Yeah.
I think that the things that would be required to establish a separate standalone business unit are all things that will ultimately need to be done in any event if at the end of tranche 1 some separation is required. The council will have to do all of that work at some point. I guess what we're saying is that by doing it now, you at least expedite that process and it will be easier and smoother, whatever direction is taken in a year's time.
Yeah. Now, I was just asking whether you thought that we had enough resources to do both that and the Three Waters reforms work that is now going to be much quicker and involve a whole pile of staff time and resources at the same time as delivering the tranche 1 projects as well.
Sure. I think council officers might be better placed to answer that question, but I am very mindful of the point that Dave made in relation to the last item, which is that the funding that's available through the MOU can be for both capital work and operations. So hopefully if there's a sort of financial constraint in some of this, the government assistance that comes through the signing of the MOU may alleviate some of that picture.
And I agree with Martin that a lot of the work is the same. So whether we set up a standalone business unit or whether we look at the arrangements for Two Waters that would come in the future, we still have to do the work to identify the assets, the costs and the resources. The bit that we save is the restructuring. So that is the only bit that we save, and that's probably a relatively small proportion of staff time in terms of the planning, although it's a larger proportion of the staff time in terms of the implementation as that restructuring process itself. But the staff recommendations do recommend a work program to identify the resources, the costs and the funding.
I don't know about others, and it's not really a question, it's just simply to complement the quality of the report. I mean, it's extraordinarily easy to read, and normally I find some technical reports more than challenging, perhaps. But the problem statements, and those who've heard me sort of comment on this before, is that often we don't state what the problem is before we try to start solving it. We just go straight to a solution. So to see these problem statements, the current state and funding of water infrastructure results in risks to water and water services, undervaluing of water and water services results in underinvestment in water services, and regulatory reform, community and cultural expectations and climate change requires significant changes to water and water services. So the other three problems sort of starkly highlighted. And I probably wouldn't have wanted to go down the track of a standalone business unit, but what I think you've pulled out is the identification for an internal staff working group, and that could involve some external assistance if required, I guess, but to develop these clear understandings of what all of the issues are, because that sets us up in good stead for resolving these problems regardless of what track we go down. So, congratulations to the writer. I'm presuming that they're in the room.
Thank you. It was a team effort.
It's definitely a team
and
effort.
We have a number in the room.
Okay, the team of writers, congratulations, well done. Yanni.
Thank you. On page 9, I really appreciate the statistics, and on the surface it looks quite like we are very much lower compared to the median investment. But I just wondered if you could, if it was able to break down those statistics in terms of per property connection from the city to the peninsula, and also whether you had any assessment of that money, that what that was before the earthquake, and how much of the skirt repairs had kind of been captured in that. I just couldn't quite tell from those statistics.
So that is a very difficult thing to do. So to assess what the per property expenditure was prior to the earthquakes, and then to incorporate skirt, and then look at after the earthquakes, we have made some assessments of that, but they are approximations in terms of the funding per property.
Right.
I think it's more helpful.
Is the funding per property on a 10-year rolling average, or is it just an annual measure?
It's a biannual measure. So Water New Zealand do a survey across the whole country, across community water supplies, or those who choose to engage in the survey, and it's done every 2 years.
Right. So is there like a chart that would show kind of historically?
Yes, and those can be found in the asset management plans for water supply, for wastewater, and for stormwater.
Right.
So well, they are for total investment, but we can calculate per connected property as well. Separating it out into Banks Peninsula and Christchurch City would require a lot of additional work. We could do it. I'm not sure that it would be helpful in terms of what we need to do in the future.
Well, I guess, I think it was really interesting to see that government announced a bespoke package for Auckland and not for us when we had the earthquake issues with the skirt and the horizontal infrastructure governance group, which doesn't seem to be acknowledged. And we also had the forced amalgamation of the peninsula, which has added a huge cost around our infrastructure, particularly around the three waters. So I certainly, it was raised through this whole process. Can we get clarity around what the consequence of that forced amalgamation did for us in terms of our budgets and our delivery? Because, these statistics are quite alarming, but I don't get any sense of whether they're kind of skewed by the two big things that have happened to us.
I'm not quite sure how to respond to that as to whether or not we get a recommendation that you're asking staff to do that work. As I say, it's quite a lot of work, so I would need a formal recommendation before kicking that work off, as it were.
I guess at a high level, can you just give me some sense of why our investment in water is so much less compared to the median? Like, what's behind those statistics being so much lower?
So there's two possible answers to that. So in terms of water supply, there's two answers. One is economies of scale. So we are a large water authority, so we have economies of scale compared to many other.
As a general rule, we don't chlorinate
supplies.
river water, which is what Auckland does.
Well, yes. So, and the second one is the quality of our source water, and the fact that it comes shooting out of the ground at pressure. So delivering that water to the consumer is also less expensive. Yeah. So that's a part of the reason for the operational costs being a little less, and also for our capital costs being less, because we're not investing in treatment plants for each of our supplies. We do, of course, have treatment plants on Banks Peninsula for the surface water supplies.
When I read 5.5 and it says, it is outlined below, provides up to information financial challenges historical underinvestment that has been exacerbated by the earthquake sequence.
That's correct. So that's the general principle that...
somebody voted to spend all of the money for renewals on infrastructure repairs after the earthquake.
Yes. So historically, like most water suppliers, we've invested less than possibly we should have, and there's a gap, and the regulations are asking for a lot more than they did in the past. So the standards for water supply infrastructure, as we all know, have increased. So there's a bit of an investment gap there.
Yeah.
And the earthquakes have also had an impact. So post-earthquakes, well, some of our water mains are brand spanking and in excellent condition. There are others that have been patched and are more fragile than they would otherwise have been. Some of those are deteriorating quite quickly, yes.
Okay. I guess one thing that I think would, because the information in here is really good.
Yeah.
But I think, sometimes context is really important as well. And I appreciate, I don't want to create a whole bunch more work for you to do. But just because we've got an integrated strategy around sort of, I guess, just communicating those higher level kind of expenditure on water, what we're doing, is there a kind of a dashboard type approach? And I think you did it really well for the coronation, when we were trying to do water conservation and the pump stations, and you had some really cool graphics. But I just wondered, in terms of a bit more holistic for Three Waters, just dashboard showing the community kind of what our targets are, how we're meeting those in terms of either expenditure targets or, I guess, key outcome targets. And just wonder if there's anything we can do in that regard.
Yes, we can, and most of that is captured in the draft activity plans and asset management plans for the long-term plan. And there we have the levels of service as well as some management performance indicators. Right. And we do propose, in fact, to put those on dashboards so that we can maintain
public facing.
Yeah. Yes, some of those are public facing. Some of them are internal. But yes, we will look to be able to communicate those more effectively and much more quickly than just an annual report, which is a snapshot, if you like, after the event.
Thank you. I think that'd be really helpful.
Yeah, and I think also that if councillors can bear in mind these challenges as they have been identified in the Section 17A review, as they do the activity management plans, as we go through each one of them individually, I think people will be able to focus their attention on what it is that we should be measuring against in a far more productive way, and that is very much outward facing rather than inward facing.
Yes, and we have proposed some new levels of service around levels of investment that haven't been in the activity management plans before. So it would be good to get feedback from councillors as to whether or not they would find those helpful and to track those year on year.
Yeah, and I think also from a public-facing point of view, I don't think that our current system of rating against property values actually indicates to people the true value of the cost of the supplying of water, and the general misbelief, the lack of belief that we don't own the water, that no one owns the water. I think that, it will require some courage, but I'd like to see the government resolve the issue of ownership, because that would then help us have a far greater ability to create a public understanding and awareness of the preciousness of this resource that we wash our cars with and various other activities. So. Very good. All right. Well, I'm happy to move the motion that we have in front of us. Do I have a seconder? Pauline? Any debate? I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. Thank you. And thank you, Martin. Please say thank you to the External Advisory Group for an excellent report. And I think, as you'll hear, it's going to continue to provide us with the basis for some good discussions as we go forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ian, can I thank you for recognising the amount of work that the staff did and the quality of the report. It was a huge undertaking, and I think it's really, really good that you did that.
Well, I think it's been also really helpful to have you and Andrew sitting on the Section 17A review, because I don't think we've had governance involvement at that level before. So
it was done differently last time. So when we did the previous Section 17A review, we did have some elected members in the creation of the doing the ILM and things like that, but not in the governance. So this was a different structure, and certainly from a staff perspective, we really appreciated it. We thought it added a lot. So thank you.
No, I think it made a difference. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. So I'll now move the resolution to exclude the public set out on pages 66 and 67 of the agenda. I'll move that be adopted. Seconded by Sarah Templeton. I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. We'll just take a quick 5-minute break.